be screwed. Feel my own adrenaline, yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 5th part of What If Aizen Finds BEN10 in Bleach Verse. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Bigby the Big Bad Wolf on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Tia Harable had been surprised when Loli and Menali arrived at her door, informing her that Lord Aizen requested her presence. Although curious, Harable maintained an externally cool demeanor as she followed them into the throne room. "Welcome, Harable," Aizen said with a smile from atop his throne and pillar, which Loli and Menali stood on each side of upon entering, as his third most powerful espada approached him. Harable got down on one knee and bowed respectfully. "What do you wish of me, Lord Aizen?" "I have a task for you and your Frexione. I would like for them to train with Ben," Aizen told her. "Whenever possible, of course." Harable raised her head, staring at Aizen in surprise and confusion. "Sir? Out of all the numeros, your Frexione have the best teamwork despite their constant arguments with each other," Aizen said. While uncertain as to what point Aizen was trying to make, Harable could not help the pride she felt at his praise. Fighting as a group had always been an integral part of her and Frexione's survival back in the old days. However, they still have plenty of potential in terms of individual ability, Aizen went on. "The 13 court guard squads are formidable opponents, so I would like our own forces to be at their best, and I believe training with Ben would be an excellent opportunity for that." Harable took in Aizen's words. Training would be beneficial for her Frexione, and she welcomed the chance for them to become stronger. She was confused as to why Aizen wanted them and their human guest to specifically train together though. "Rest assured, I will tell the other espada to train their Frexione as well," Aizen said. "As for why I want yours and Ben to train with each other, it seems the most practical choice. He's someone new that they can test their skills against, and it provides all 4 of you a chance to get better acquainted with him. Besides, I don't think it would be wise to have Ben train with the other Frexione. Grimgiles would probably try to finish what he started, and I think Enoitra would encourage Tesla to do the same. I doubt Shales would be suitable and Barragans," Aizen chuckled. "I believe that goes without saying." "I understand, Lord Aizen," Harable said respectfully. Despite her own uncertainties, if Lord Aizen was confident in this, then she would do as he wished. "But what about his training with Tozen?" "I'm sure Tozen wouldn't mind if Ben trained with anyone else," Aizen reassured her. "Considering it will only benefit us, there's no reason he'd object. I'll allow the 2 of you to work out the best course of action between yourselves." Harable bowed her head again. "As you wish, Lord Aizen." "Thank you, Harable," Aizen said. "That will be all." And with that, Harable got up and left. When Harable returned to her chambers, she found her Frexione immediately at attention the moment she came in. "Hello, ladies," she greeted them casually. "What did Lord Aizen want, Lady Harable?" Sung Sun asked, a curious but concerned look on her face that she shared with Apache and Mila Rose. "He would like for you to train with Tennyson," Harable answered, getting straight to the point. Their reaction was exactly how she pictured it would. They were staring at her, frozen in place. If it had been anyone else, Apache would have demanded that they were joking. But she knew her leader wasn't the type. "Why does he want us to do that?" she asked instead. "He wants you to become stronger before we face Soul Society," Harable explained. Her Frexione all looked at each other uneasily, assuming the worst. "Why us specifically?" Mila Rose asked. They were no doubt worried Lord Aizen thought they were weaker than the others if they were singled out for training. "Lord Aizen wishes to have every Fraxian train," Harable reassured her, having expected their reactions. "He praised your teamwork, but said you could still improve fighting individually." "Why do we need to train with that human to do it?" Apache asked, less than thrilled about the idea already. "Lord Aizen believes having someone new to fight against will be helpful," Harable told her. He also sees it as another opportunity to know Tennyson better and no doubt learn more of his abilities. Mila Rose's brows furrowed as she contemplated her leader's words. I suppose that makes sense. There is still so much about Ben Tennyson that we don't know, Sung Sun added. And it's still too early to say if he is our ally indefinitely. This is true, Harable acknowledged. Perhaps in time you might even see Tennyson as a comrade. Her Phyrexiani were completely floored by her statement. Forgive us, Lady Harable, Sung Sun said hastily. Ben Tennyson's abilities make him an ideal addition to our forces, but I doubt we could ever be friends with a human. Why not? Harable asked, causing her Phyrexiani to gape at her. Lady Harable? Apache stuttered, not expecting her leader to say such a thing. Ben Tennyson has proven himself to be a far more decent and honorable person than a decent amount of our comrades, Harable stated. Not to mention brave, noble, and understanding of sacrifice. Her Phyrexiani stared at her in stunned silence. Never had they heard their leader speak about someone with such high regard apart from Aizen himself. For the time being, Ben Tennyson has earned my respect, Harable added. We shall see if he's able to keep it. And it was true. While his protecting of her Phyrexian was the biggest factor, she couldn't help being impressed after hearing about Ben's history. When presented with such great power, he chose to help others instead of conquer like his nemesis Vilgax, and he was perfectly willing to sacrifice that same power if it also meant saving others. He was also understanding and empathetic if Lillinet's words about him being friends with someone who tried to kill him were true. The other three looked at each other, having realized that training with Ben was inevitable. They weren't thrilled about it, but if Harable thought it was for the best, they would grit their teeth and bear it. We understand, Lady Harable, Sung Sun spoke their mutual decision. Harable closed her eyes, which her Phyrexiani took as a sign of acknowledgement. Do the best you can, she told them, but do not show all of your techniques. Her Phyrexiani blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected request. As you said, Sung Sun, it is still too early to say whether or not Ben Tennyson's truly our ally. He has gained my respect, but not yet my trust. As such, I do not wish for him to know all of our abilities. Her Phyrexiani knew she had a good point, plus they suspected that they still didn't know all of Ben's abilities, so it was only fair they held back some things from him. Understood, Lady Harable, Apache said firmly. We won't let you down. In Sterrick's room, Lillinet was in stitches while Ben was telling his latest story. Are you serious? She asked a smirking Ben in between laughter. Yep, Ben replied, crossing his arms. There's no way, Lillinet insisted. I couldn't make this up if I tried, Ben told her. You honestly expect me to believe you fought a giant space tick? Ben had been telling her of the very first time he had unlocked Cannonbolt. If she hadn't been amused by his initial attempts to figure out the alien's powers, which she had then learning that the very first thing he fought as Cannonbolt was a gigantic space tick sold her. It's the truth, Ben said. It had some followers that called it the Great One, and it came to Earth to feed on our planet's energy. Was it a tough fight? Lillinet asked. More of an annoyance really, Ben admitted. The tick just had its followers fight us while it was feeding off the Earth. But its body was super tough. I had thrown everything I had at it, and I couldn't even make a dent. Lillinet stared. Wow. Course back then my idea of a strategy was just keep hitting something till it breaks, Ben said sheepishly. I probably could have beaten that big bug with one of my other guys if I had used them right. But in the end, I used Cannonbolt to save the day. And to think, I first thought he was lame. Lillinet grinned, remembering the power Cannonbolt had displayed when she first saw it. Guess he proved you wrong, huh? Big time, Ben said with a grin. Also, I learned from the Great One's worshippers that one of the planets it already destroyed was that of Cannonbolt's species. Lillinet gasped in shock. It had? Ben nodded. Makes it kind of ironic, huh? After I beat the Great One, its worshippers started worshipping me. Apparently those guys need something to serve and praise. He grinned. Not that I was complaining at the time. Lillinet rolled her eyes. I'll bet. So what happened next? I turned back into a human and they didn't want to worship me anymore, Ben stated bluntly. Lillinet burst into laughter. That's priceless. Well, how would you feel if you found out something you worshipped was actually a little kid? Stark spoke for the first time since they got back. Ben chuckled at that. Yeah, I guess you're right. Lillianette looked back at Stark with surprise. I had no idea you were still up, she grinned. Actually staying awake for something. I'm impressed. Stark grumbled in annoyance, already wishing he hadn't said anything. Lillianette gave him a smug look of satisfaction. Ben just smiled at them, the interaction way better than whenever Lillianette started hitting Stark. Once she felt satisfied, Lillianette turned to Ben again. What was another adventure you had that summer? She was really interested in learning more about the time Ben first got the OMNITRIX, probably still trying to wrap it around her head that Ben had been a simple kid during all of it. Ben ran through all the crazy times he had that fateful summer in his mind. Well, there was this one time. His story was cut short by the sound of someone knocking at the door. Lillianette glared at the door, annoyed with the interruption and the fact that people seemed to drop by their place quite a lot recently. What? Again? I wonder who it is this time, Ben commented as he went to answer the door. When he did, he was greeted to the sight of HAREM and her Fanfictione once more. You? Lillianette asked once she saw who had knocked. Is this going to be a regular thing with you four now? Lillianette, Miller Rose scowled at the smaller Arankar's sass. Then she remembered when Lillianette kicked her, making her scowl deepen. Miller Rose, HAREM softly warned her Fraxian before facing Ben and Lillianette again. I see you've been given a change of clothes, she said as she looked over Ben's new outfit. I think it suits you. Oh, Ben looked down at his clothes before rubbing the back of his head at the compliment. Thanks. HAREM's Fraxione then realized that Ben was wearing an Arankar outfit and looked it over too. It wasn't a bad ensemble, all things considered. He could almost pass as one of them. Almost. So what brings you back here, HAREM? Stark asked as he sat up. Lord Aizen has requested that my Fraxione train with BEN10, HAREM told her fellow Espada. Ben did a double take when she said that. More training? And with HAREM's Fraxione. Lillianette made a face as she slumped. Not more training. Is Lord Aizen trying to work Ben to death? Why does Aizen want me to train with them? Ben interjected. He had seen the look Miller Rose had given Lillianette, so he decided to prevent things from escalating. Aside from helping them become stronger for the upcoming war, HAREM said, it's another way for us to get better acquainted. Oh, was the only response Ben could think of. Despite Lillianette's objections, he didn't mind the training too much. It helped pass the time, gave him a better idea of what he was up against. Plus, he actually wanted to learn more about his allies, especially Aizen. He even considered asking Stark and Lillianette if they could tell a little bit about themselves. Is Tozen going to be okay with this? Are we going to train right now? Lord Aizen is certain that Tozen won't mind, HAREM replied. And no, we aren't training right away. I simply wanted to let you know in advance. What are you three doing? Ben's been telling us about some of his adventures, Lillianette informed her. Oh? HAREM asked. Yeah, Lillianette smiled. You won't believe some of the stuff he's done. She started giggling. You missed the part where he fought a vampire clown, or when he found the Fountain of Youth, and turned it into a crater when he threw a temper tantrum. She clutched her stomach as she went into full-blown laughter. Then he told me about how he looked like a total idiot when he first turned into Cannonbolt before using him to kill a giant space tick that was gonna suck the earth dry. HAREM's Fraxian stared at Lillianette before turning their heads towards Ben. A vampire clown? The Fountain of Youth? A giant space tick? Miller Rose quickly recovered, putting a hand on her hip. I'd ask if you were lying, but considering the things I've seen and heard from you so far, I'm strangely inclined to believe you. Ben just shrugged at them with a playful smile on his face. HAREM crossed her arms. Would it be all right if I heard some of your stories? Everyone else was taken aback by her sudden request. While Ben was willing to learn more about the Arankar, he honestly didn't expect any of them, with the exception of Lillianette, to want to know about him personally. And it was something she chose to do on her own, if the surprised looks from her Fraxione were anything to go by. Well, I don't mind, Ben told her before looking over at Stark. Is it all right with you? Stark grimaced once he realized all eyes were on him. Do as you like, he mumbled before lying back down. HAREM turned to her still baffled Fraxione. You can go back if you wish. I won't make you stay if you don't want to. The three shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do. They still didn't really like being around Ben, but HAREM thought it was possible for them to become friends. Plus, she was willing to stay. If their leader would, then so would they. "We're fine, Lady HAREM," Mila Rose reassured their leader. "We'll stay." HAREM nodded to her, pleased to see that her girls were making an effort. Ben smiled. He could see that things were still tense between them, but at least they seemed to be making progress. And so HAREM entered Sterk's chambers, leaning her back against the wall. Her Fraxian followed suit, preferring to simply stand however. Once she was certain that everyone was relatively comfortable, Lilynette brought her attention back to Ben. "All right, we're ready." Ben tapped his chin, trying to decide which adventure he should tell next. Then a light bulb went off in his head as he thought of the perfect one. "How about I tell you about the time I got sick?" Lilynette, Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Soo made faces composed of both disgust and bewilderment. "Why would you want to talk about when you were sick?" Mila Rose asked. HAREM suspected that Ben had chosen those select words to draw them in. "There must be quite the story behind it, isn't there?" Ben grinned at how quickly HAREM had caught on. "That's right." The rest weren't as amused though. "Well," Apache practically demanded, "what happened?" "Apache," said Arankar flinched, looking sheepishly at her mistress, whose eyes were silently telling her to control herself. As Apache's own eyes drifted to the floor, HAREM focused on Ben. "What did happen?" Something in her tone hinted that she too wanted Ben to get to the actual story. Seeing that his audience was getting a little impatient, Ben decided to get the story. But first he couldn't resist overdramatically clearing his throat before doing so. This earned him annoyed looks from everyone else in the room, including Sterk. Ben held his hands out in surrender, albeit with another big grin on his face, and proceeded to tell the story. "It all started after I caught a thief trying to make a speedy getaway in a fancy-looking car," Ben began. "After stopping the guy and leaving him for the police, I spotted a nearby ice cream truck. And since I had just stopped a criminal, I thought I was entitled to a little reward. So I went into the truck and decided to help myself to some ice cream." This took his audience by surprise. Ben had admitted to all of them that he had made mistakes, but they honestly hadn't expected him to do something quite like treating himself to a self-entitled reward. He chuckled at their reactions. "Unfortunately for me, karma decided to come pretty early that day. Staying in that freezing ice cream truck is what caused me to get sick. I felt so weak, my nose was runny, I was sneezing all the time, and Grandpa said I had a temperature of 101. In short, a summer cold." Lilynette threw her head back as she laughed. "Maybe that'll teach you not to eat ice cream inside of an ice cream truck." Gwen said something similar, Ben said, then laughed to himself as he remembered getting back at her by using her new blouse as a tissue. HAREM remained impassive, but her Fraxian were definitely amused, imagining Ben in such a state. "Karma really did catch up with you," Mila Rose said in agreement. "So what happened next?" "Grandpa figured I just need some of his Sanju Yen Peen remedy, so we went to Chinatown to pick up some ingredients." Ben shivered, the smell of his grandpa's concoction still fresh in his mind after all these years. HAREM noticed this. "I take it this Sanju Yen Peen wasn't very appetizing." "I'll get to that later," Ben replied quickly. "Anyway, while we were getting the ingredients, this councilwoman named Liang was making a speech about a downtown movement plan she was working on, when all of a sudden the place got attacked by a swarm of wasps. And that was when we met Clancy, a whack job with the power to control bugs." Lilynette titled her head, a quizzical look on her face, while HAREM's Fraxian looked more disappointed than anything. "Controlling bugs?" Apache asked skeptically. "That's it?" "That doesn't sound so impressive," Sung Sun said dismissively. Ben shrugged. "I'll admit that it doesn't sound cool at first, but Clancy and his bugs were no joke. He kidnapped the councilwoman with his wasps and bailed. When I tried going after him, I learned something. My cold affected my aliens. That certainly got everyone's attention." "Really?" Lilynette asked, staring at him. Ben nodded. "I turned into my best tracker, Wildmutt, but the cold clogged up his senses. I was running around blind, almost caused a firework explosion with Gwen at ground zero. Luckily Grandpa Max was able to save her. though she wound up smelling like chicken dumplings afterwards. He knew that he taking a bit of a risk by letting the Arankar know something like his aliens being affected by whatever condition his human body was in, but he guessed they would brush it off since they already knew he had regenerating aliens like Swampfire. Thanks to Gwen and her laptop, we were able to find Clancy's apartment, where we figured he took the councilwoman, Ben continued. We found her there all right, literally up to her neck in Black Widows. Lilinet and Haribel's Fraxian stared at Ben, repressing a desire to shiver, and Stark winced at the thought. Even to them, being covered in bugs was unpleasant to think about. You see, Haribel said to them. Any ability can be useful if you know how to properly apply it. The other girls nodded grimly, regretting their previous disregard for Clancy's power. Were you able to save the councilwoman? Lilinet asked, wanting to move on and get the thought of being buried in bugs out of her mind. Ben cringed as he thought about what happened next. I was, at the cost of covering her in snot. Lilinet, Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun all shot him looks of disgust. Haribel herself furrowed her eyebrows in displeasure, and Stark was shooting Ben an incredulous look. You saved her? By sneezing on her? Sung Sun inquired, her face scrunching up behind her sleeve. Do we even want to know how you managed to pull that off? Mila Rose asked dryly. I was fourarms at the time, Ben explained before shuddering. By the way, sick fourarms, don't want to go through that again. Not only did I have mega snot, I was weaker, and I had these huge hives under my arms. Bleh, Lilinet exclaimed, sticking her tongue out. Are you trying to make us sick? Hey, I was the one experiencing it, so how do you think I felt? Ben retorted. That earned a collective wince from his audience, each of them stuck with the image of suffering that sort of ailment. See, can we get back to the story? Apache mumbled, looking slightly green herself. Sure thing, Ben replied sympathetically. Well, Clancy wasn't happy, so he sixed a bunch of red ants on us. They even formed a giant fist and sent me flying. Lilinet gawked. Having seen fourarms power firsthand, the idea of him getting knocked around by literal ants, no matter how many, was hard to take in. It was because of your cold, wasn't it? She figured. You did say it made you weaker. Hey now, don't underestimate ants, Ben said. One ant is said to lift 10 times its own weight. Get 100 of those guys together, and that means 1,000 times their weight. Lilinet blinked rapidly. Well, I guess when you put it like that. Course, I don't know if there actually was 100 ants or not, Ben confessed. But when I was trying to get my second wind, they started swarming me, Ben continued. They were all over my legs and everything. Lilinet snickered as she imagined fourarms scratching himself like crazy as countless ants crawled up his pants. Apache started snickering alongside her, Mila Rose chuckled softly, and Sung Sun quietly laughed into her hand. A bemused Ben shook his head, having suspected this would be their reaction. Unfortunately, I was so caught up in getting those ants off, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I accidentally smashed a lot of the place's support beams and wound up bringing the whole building down. Lilinet threw back her head as she laughed. You knocked down a whole building? Apache sneered at him. Nice one. Talk about a bull in a china shop, Mila Rose commented with a smirk. Hey, the whole place looked like it was on the brink of falling down anyway, Ben defended himself. I just moved things along. That's one way to put it, Sung Sun said snidely behind her hand. No doubt Clancy was furious you destroyed the very thing he had been fighting to protect, Haribel asked, and she certainly didn't sound amused like the others. Ben even flinched at her tone. However, it was an accident, and as you said, the building was due to collapse, Haribel reasoned. All the same, I'm sure Clancy was angry at you. Oh, he was, Ben agreed. Didn't help that he used some of his bugs to shield him from the building, and they wound up squashed for their trouble. Now that was his fault, Sung Sun stated. If he was going to use them as a shield, he should have known that risked killing them. I don't think the guy realized what happens when he uses his friends to fight, Ben admitted. All I do know is that since his home got wrecked and some of his bugs were dead, he decided to destroy the whole city with a nuclear blast from the city's nuclear power plant. We tracked him there just in time for the reactor's core to almost reach critical level. Grandpa had to manually shut it down, so we went to the core so he could activate the emergency override system. How did your grandpa know to do that? Sung's son inquired. Ben grinned at her. That's a story for another time. Sung's son gave him a deadpan look in response, but Ben just chuckled and went on with his story. When we got there, Clancy was waiting for us with a bunch of cockroaches. Apache made a face. Cockroaches? Why cockroaches? Why not something deadly like scorpions or something? Clancy was going to use the cockroaches as an armor to survive the blast with, Ben explained. Impressive, HAREM said, noting all the different ways Clancy used his bugs in battle. I was too busy trying to save a city to be impressed, Ben said. Gwen told me the best way to get rid of Clancy's bugs was a good barbecue, so I decided to go heat blast. Lillianette gasped at the name. The guy you used on the Fountain of Youth. I decided to keep Bug Brain busy while Grandpa tried to shut down the reactor, Ben told them. But for some reason my powers weren't working. Clancy started wailing on me with his cockroach armor until I learned something cool. Turns out when Heat Blast has a cold, he gets ice powers. Wait, what? Mila rose, she shook her head. How does that work? I don't know, Ben confessed. But it was my best shot to take Clancy down. Plus, there was only 1 minute before the reactor blew up, so I stopped both of them cold. Lillianette, Apache, and Mila Rose groaned at the lame joke. Even Sterk looked disappointed at Ben's poor humor. HAREM was the only one who remained impassive. Everyone's a critic, Ben muttered before continuing. With the day saved, the bad guy defeated, and my cold finally gone, it was time for us to leave. Unfortunately, we didn't get far because Clancy and his cockroaches somehow managed to escape and caught up with us. To make things worse, my OMNITRIX was timed out, so I couldn't go hero. Gwen suggested a candy bar could attract the bugs, and that gave me an idea. Earlier, when Grandpa had made that Sanju Yenpin, I hid it away because I really didn't want to try that stuff. It smelled horrible, and I bet it tasted worse. But those cockroaches found it irresistible, and when I threw it into the nearby river, they all went after it. Lillianette grinned as she figured out what came next, leaving Clancy totally defenseless. Ben grinned back at her. You got it. 1 punch from Grandpa and he was out. Bet you were finally glad to be done with him, Sung's son said. Yeah, he was really starting to bug me, Ben said back, laughing at how annoyed the others looked. Oh, come on, that was perfect. If by perfect you mean perfectly stupid, Apache scoffed. Then yeah, it was. Ben rubbed the back of his head neck by the smile remained. Tough crowd. Well, that was quite the story, Sung's son said. It's interesting how your well-being affects that of your aliens. Does it work the other way around? It depends, Ben figured was the best answer. And it was the truth. Sometimes injuries on his aliens were carried over to him, and other times they wouldn't. He had gotten a cut on his knee when he scraped it as human Gaussor. Then there was the time Tetrax shattered him to pieces as Diamond Head, but he was perfectly fine when he turned human again. Does the Ultimatrix heal your aliens? Lillianette asked. Heal them? Ben repeated, looking down at the Ultimatrix. Yeah, does fourarms only have 3 arms now, or does the Ultimatrix fix his 4th one? Lillianette wondered. Huh, Ben said to himself as he pondered this. Well, to be honest, I don't really know. Unless the Tetraman DNA itself was damaged, fourarms should be as good as new the next time Ben turned into him. Hopefully. Do you have any other stories you feel like sharing? HAREM asked Ben, deciding to change the subject. Any less disgusting ones? Apache added. Oh, I've got plenty, Ben replied. But I was actually going to ask if I could hear some of your stories. Since we're supposed to be learning more about each other and all. His audience had not expected such a request. Lillianette and HAREM's Phyrexione looked at each other, then at the Espada who looked at each other in turn. Ben wondered what was up with their hesitance. Were they trying to keep information from him? Or did something personal happen that they didn't want to share? I'll go, Stark said, adjusting himself on his pillows. Since I'm the one looking after him and all. Stuck, Lillianette began, and Ben was surprised by how quiet her voice was. Ben's been willing to share personal stuff with us, Stark said with a shrug. Only fair we share some too. Lillianette brought her knees up to her chin and wrapped her arms around her legs. Ben was starting to regret ever saying anything. Look, if whatever you're about to tell me makes you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to, Ben tried to reassure them. It's all right, not that big a deal, Stock said nonchalantly, but Ben had a feeling it was a bigger deal than he was playing it off as. Well, why don't you talk about something else? Ben suggested, feeling like he had put the Arrancar on the spot somehow. It's the only thing interesting that's ever happened to us, Stock said softly. The time Lillinet and I first met Aizen. Lillinet hugged herself a little tighter at this. Ben wondered why. Stark rubbed his head with a sigh before beginning his story. You see, Ben, Lillinet and I are different from other Arrancar. You know how most have the nucleus of their powers sealed inside of a weapon? It's not like that with us. Lillinet and I were once one and the same being. Ben's eyebrows shot straight up at this revelation. He looked back and forth between Stack and Lillinet. The former was looking down at the ground while the latter's eyes were off to the side. I'm not sure what we originally looked, Stark said as he continued. Probably didn't look like either of us. Back when we were one, we were strong. Too strong. All the weaker hollows around us would die just by being near us. If Ben's eyes weren't wide before, they were now. The combined form of Stark and Lillinet was so strong others died just by their presence alone. Now it made perfect sense why Stark was the top Espada. For a moment Ben wondered why he wasn't dead, but quickly figured that Aizen must have taught Stack how to control it. Because of that we were lonely. So lonely that our soul split in two just to escape the loneliness. I always envied the weak, Stark said, drawing surprised looks from not just Ben, but also from Haribel's group. Apparently Stark had kept this unexpected envy to himself. If you're weak, you can always find others to be around. I wanted to either become weak or find others who were as strong as me. Haribel closed her eyes and her Phyrexiane looked at Stock and Lillinet incredulously before softening to looks of empathy and understanding. One day, Lord Aizen found us amongst the remains of our latest victims, Stock said. Impressed with our power, he invited us to join him. He was strong, first person to talk to us without dying. We figured we might as well. Lord Aizen rescued us from the loneliness, so we owe him a lot. Ben sat in silence as he took all of this in. He couldn't even imagine being so lonely. It sounded awful. At the same time it also said something about Stark as a person. All that power and he would gladly trade it away to be with other people. Ben looked over at Lillinet now. When Stark and Lillinet separated, did they both get an equal amount of their original power? Did Stark get the majority of it since he was an Espada and she wasn't? How powerful was he now? And how powerful would he become if he rejoined with Lillinet? I had no idea, Apache muttered. It's not like any of us actually talk about our lives before we met Lord Aizen, Lillinet snapped half-heartedly. Well, life wasn't easy for us either, Lillinet, Apache retorted. Easier than us, Lillinet grumbled. At least you four had each other. Apache clenched her fists and scowled at her, but she was unable to think of a decent response. Sung Sun sighed before facing her leader. So, is it our turn, Lady Haribel? Ben looked over at the third Espada, wondering what life must have been like for them before they met Aizen and why it was so bad. Yes, Haribel said. Lord Aizen has told you that hollows eat souls to fulfill the void within them, but there is more to it. When the void can no longer be sustained by human souls, a hollow will start to eat his own kind. Ben narrowed his eyes at this. Their hunger was so strong they'd start eating each other, sounded a lot like Osmosians and their incredible hunger for energy. Despite his discomfort at how hollows sustained themselves, Ben did feel sympathy for them. Hugo Mundo took survival of the fittest to a whole other level. Though hollows are content to eat whoever they happen upon, women are targeted the most, Haribel said. Here her Phyrexian's looks of discomfort came back, all looking anywhere but at their audience. Back when I was a Vasto Lord, the highest evolution of hollow apart from becoming an Arrancar, I gathered other females into a group so we could increase our chances of survival. Your Phyrexiane, Ben figured. He was interested in learning more about this hollow evolution. If Haribel had been a fully evolved hollow before becoming an Arrancar, small wonder she was one of the top Espada. Correct, Haribel answered with a nod. Together we fought off any attackers. Sometimes we killed if we needed to, but for the most part we simply chased our foes away. We never ate any of them. Ben was surprised by this. How come? Harable looked Ben straight in the eye, making him lean back from her piercing gaze. I did not wish to become stronger by sacrificing others. Lady Harable once told us that there is no world without sacrifices, Apache spoke up, her tone even but surprisingly soft. But if we force casualties on others, Miller Rose added, we would sustain casualties of our own. That's why Lady Harable decided that she'd rather win as part of a group if she couldn't defeat someone on her own, Sung Sun explained. We were doing well for ourselves for quite some time, Harable continued. But then one day, we were attacked by an Arankar who had a grudge against us back when he was a hollow. We fought him to the best of our abilities, but he was too powerful. He was about to finish me when Lord Aizen arrived and struck the Arankar down. After apologizing for giving that Arankar his power, Lord Aizen then offered for me to join him. Harable looked over at her Phyrexione. In exchange I would be granted power. Power I could use to protect my subordinates without a sacrifice. I accepted and Lord Aizen then turned all 4 of us into Arankar. I was placed among the Espada, and the others became my Phyrexione. Apache, Miller Rose, and Sung Sun all smiled at Harable, and Ben couldn't resist a smile of his own. After hearing all that, he definitely saw why those 3 were so devoted to Harable. It also strengthened Ho's own beliefs about how decent they were. Sadly, it didn't help him figure out Aizen any better. Ben decided he would focus on that in time. Right now he saw everyone was still a little uncomfortable with sharing such personal information, so he decided to make them feel better. Thanks, he said kindly to both Stark and Harable, for sharing your pasts with me. I know it must have been hard. Stark just sighed, rubbing the back of his head. Lilianette gave Ben a small smile and Harable's Phyrexian looked a little more relaxed. But Ben could see the atmosphere was still pretty tense, so he needed to lighten things up somehow. How about I tell one more story, then we can start training, he suggested. That sounds fair, Harable said. Do you already have one in mind? Ben had a feeling they were going to get a kick out of this story, which of course was his intent. How about I tell you the time Gwen and I wound up switching bodies during our road trip? That certainly lifted the mood up. Harable's Phyrexione all stared at him in disbelief, while Lilianette blinked once before bursting into laughter again. How did you do that? She asked. Ben grinned as he felt the mood lift. It was thanks to Gwen's archenemy, Charmcaster. Lilianette's eye widened. I remember her. She and that Hex guy were in the story with the Fountain of Youth. Your cousin has an archenemy too? Sung Sun asked, mildly surprised. Ben shrugged with a smile. I can't hog all the bad guys now, could I? Grandpa Max took us to a place called Salem, Massachusetts. He decided to mercifully skip over the part where Max had them wear pilgrim outfits. We hardly got started when Charmcaster attacked us, so I went alien to try and stop her. For some reason she had taken an interest in my OMNITRIX and tried casting a spell that would make us switch bodies. Unfortunately for her, Gwen got in the way and they wound up switching instead. Wait, Apache interrupted. I thought you said you and your cousin switched bodies. I did, Ben replied. But I never said Gwen hadn't switched with someone else first. Apache grumbled at the misdirection. Anyway, Charmcaster managed to trick everyone into thinking she was Gwen and Gwen was her. Gwen, in Charmcaster's body, got taken away to juvie, kind of like a jail for underage criminals, while Charmcaster in Gwen's body tried getting me to tell her more about the OMNITRIX. You seriously didn't realize something was wrong with your cousin? Miller Rose asked incredulously. Not at first, Ben admitted. Course me and Gwen fought a lot back then, so when she started asking me, so I thought she was just tricking, and we got into what I thought was a typical fight. I started thinking something was up when Gwen suddenly started acting nice and offering to cook something for us. While we shopping for the ingredients, we wound up foiling a robbery. Gwen brought the lobsters to life and sent them on the robbers. I wanted to help them, but Gwen said they needed to suffer. Later that night, when dinner was ready, Charmcaster trapped me with some of these rock minions of hers. Gwen managed to escape juvie and caught up with us. She started saying some things that only she would know, proving that she and Charmcaster had switched bodies. Before we could do anything, Charmcaster was able to cast the body-switching spell against with the ingredients she bought for dinner. But she only got her own body back, while you and your cousin wound up in each other's, Sung's son finished. Exactly. Charmcaster captured us and took us onto a ship while she tried to make the spell again. We needed to get Gwen's my arm free so that she could use the OMNITRIX. Gwen told me she had some hand lotion in her, or rather my back pocket. To get it out, Gwen needed to kick it out. Ben chuckled. Painful, but the fact that Gwen was kicking her own butt made it worthwhile. Lillianette rolled her eye, but she was smiling. You two really didn't get along. We were kids. Fighting with each other is what we do, Ben said. Anyway, Gwen was able to get the lotion out and use it to get her wrist free. She tried turning into fourarms, but got cannonbolt instead. Still, that was enough to get us free, and we started fighting Charmcaster and her rock monsters. She cast the spell again, Gwen, but I got in the way, putting me and Gwen back into our proper bodies. Charmcaster got knocked out by Gwen and then sent to juvie. And if from what Gwen told me about her time there in Charmcaster's body, she was going to be in for a tough welcome. Then we didn't have to put up with her until the Fountain Youth and the -10. The -10? Harable asked. 10 of Ben's enemies forming a team against him, Stark explained. And all of this happened during one summer, Sung's son asked. At least I was one of the kids who could say his summer vacation wasn't boring, Ben said. True, Mila Rose said. And you haven't started on your adventures when you were older. The stories will have to wait, Harable interjected. First we will train, then we can hear some more stories. Sounds good to me, Ben said as he stood up before nearly falling over. His legs had fallen asleep, but he'd been so caught up in sharing stories that he hadn't noticed. He quickly rubbed his legs to put some feeling back in them. Just give me a moment. Lillianette and Harable's Fraxian all chuckled at Ben's predicament, as he made a face at them in return. You guys have fun, Stark said before falling back onto his pillows. Lillianette frowned at Stark before running up and giving him a kick, causing him to sit up with a yelp. What was that for? He demanded. Because I felt like it, Lillianette told him before turning to Harable. So we ready to go? Harable looked over at Ben to see if he was ready. Ben raised a finger to request a moment before standing straight up. Okay, I'm good, he said. Let's go. And so Ben, Lillianette, Harable, and her Fraxiani were back in the courtyard. Harable and Lillianette stood off to the side, the latter of whom waited in anticipation, while Ben faced Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung's son. Get ready, Tennyson, Apache called out as she removed her cufflinks, which unfolded into bladed chakrams. We admit that you have impressive skills, Mila Rose said as she unsheathed her sword. But don't underestimate us simply because we're not Espada. Lord Aizen himself has acknowledged our teamwork as the greatest among Arankar, Sung's son said as a sigh emerged from her sleeve. Taking us lightly would be your downfall. Ben grinned as he activated the Ultimatrix. All right, bring it on, he slammed the dial down. Lillianette grinned as Ben was consumed by the all-too-familiar flash of green light. This is gonna be good. Harable crossed her arms as Ben was engulfed by the green light, but she maintained a neutral expression. Lillianette was obviously eager to see how the fight would go, while Harable's Fraxian were filled with determination to prove themselves to Lady Harable and Lord Aizen. But they were also tense about facing someone who could fight on par with the Espada. The light faded, revealing 4 arms, with all 4 of his arms, flashing everyone a smirk. Though she still appeared impassive, Harable was intrigued. If her guess was right, this was one of the aliens that Tennyson used against Grimjow. She wondered how well her girls would fare against such an opponent. Lillianette, on the other hand, was thrilled. All right, 4 arms. Guess you were right, Ben. Yeah, how about that? Fourarms said, grinning as he flexed all his fingers. He faced Harable's Fraxian and took a fighting stance. Bring it on. No serious injuries, if possible, Harable spoke up, though it was debatable whether she was speaking for the sake of Ben or her Fraxian. Understood, Lady Harable, Apache said to her leader, before addressing her teammates. All right, let's show this human what we can really do. Who do you think you're giving orders to, Apache? Mila Rose asked dryly, though she prepared herself all the same. You're being pretty full of yourself, Sung's son added, though she brandished her own weapon for battle. Fourarms clenched his fists tightly. This was it. Apache made the first move, using Sunito to appear before the Tetramand and lash out with her chakrams. Fourarms sidestepped, just managing to dodge her attack, but then Mila Rose appeared right beside him, swinging her blade. He managed to dodge the blow when something else struck his leg, forcing him down on one knee. The attacker, Sung Sun with her sai peeking out of her long sleeve, gave him a small but smug smirk of her own. Seeing their opponent down gave Apache confidence as she moved in for another strike. Thinking quickly, Fourarms scooped up some sand and threw it in her face. She screamed in outrage and indignation as she tried to brush the sand from her eyes. Fourarms took advantage of the opening to grab and toss her into her teammates, who only had enough time to widen their eyes before Apache slammed into them. All three sprawled onto the ground in a tangled mess of limbs. Lillianette snickered at the state they were in. Fourarms grinned, putting his hands on his hips. Gotta have to do better than that. So he has experience fighting multiple opponents, HAREM noted. Lillianette looked up at her. You're not upset. Your Frexiani aren't doing too good. The training has only just begun, HAREM said in a matter-of-fact tone. And if they do lose, this fight will serve as motivation for them to become stronger. Lillianette couldn't help but smile. At least the third Espada was a good sport about this. She doubted someone like Barragan or Grimjow would have been as considerate in regards to their Frexiani. Back at the battlefield, Apache pushed her way out of the pile that was her, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun, glaring daggers at the alien hero. Don't think you've won, she shouted. Mila Rose and Sung Sun got to their feet. That was impressive, the latter conceded grudgingly. We can't give up, Mila Rose said tensely, narrowing her eyes at Fourarms. We can't let Lady HAREM and Lord Aizen think their faith in us is misplaced. Of course not, Sung Sun said, slightly irritated. But we'll need to be careful. Fourarms tilted his head and crossed both sets of his arms as he watched the girls talking amongst themselves. He brought two hands to his mouth. Hey, he shouted. You three finished? Or are you ready for more? Rather than responding verbally, Apache made the first move again. This time, though, she attacked by throwing one of her chakrams at him. The Tetraman knocked the projectile to the side with a flick of his arm, but winced at a sudden pain. He inspected his arm and spotted blood trickling down from a small cut. Fourarms had a feeling that if this had been a real fight, he might have lost his arm, again. Maybe he should see if Aizen could make pieces of armor or something for him. Apache's grin grew, having managed to draw first blood. This time Mila Rose and Sung Sun attacked simultaneously, forcing Fourarms on the defensive as he dodged their various strikes. Their goal wasn't to cut him up, but there was always a chance that they might cut him up intentionally. Fourarms decided he didn't want to find out and leaped backwards, his strong legs allowing him to jump several feet away from his attackers. The three shot forward to attack him again, but Fourarms was ready for them. He pulled his arms back and slammed them all together, unleashing a shockwave that blasted the girls backwards and into the ground. Lillianette grinned, remembering when Fourarms used that attack against Grimjow. HAREM's eyebrows shot up at the unexpected move. This alien really was a formidable force. Now I'm really getting pissed, Apache shrieked as she picked herself up for the second time. We're still going too easy on him, Sung Sun said as she sat up. Human or not, he's a capable fighter and right now he's making fools out of us in front of Lady HAREM. Mila Rose sat down on one knee. Which means we need to fight harder. Apache looked back at the others. Think we should use that? Whatever that was had to be drastic because Mila Rose and Sung Sun's eyes widened. It could work, Mila Rose considered. That might be going too far though, Sung Sun pointed out. This is just a mere training session. We should save that for an actual battle. Besides, I'm not keen on showing Tennyson one of our deadliest abilities. Apache and Mila Rose frowned as they realized Sung Sun had a point. What about releasing? Apache suggested. Not yet, Mila Rose replied. We should save that for another session, allow us to catch him off guard. So what do we do? Apache demanded. He's good and skilled, but not invincible, Mila Rose stated. If we keep him pinned down, we can beat him without going all out. Apache grinned and Sung Sun smiled behind her sleeve. All three looked back at Fourarms, who started feeling antsy from the wicked gleam in their eyes. Apache then pulled back her fist, around which red energy was gathering. Not again, forearms groaned when he realized it was a bala. He moved to dodge, but the ball of energy was faster, the explosion from the attack knocking him off his feet. The moment the hero was airborne, Miller Rose appeared beside him and slammed her right fist into his abdomen. The blow was powerful enough to send forearms slamming back into the ground. Hard. Oof, the Tetraman winced from both the blow and the impact. Good punch, he muttered, rubbing his chest. Miller Rose grinned in response. Just then, out of the corner of his eyes, forearms noticed what appeared to be the glow of a pink light, and it appeared to be glowing brighter. He turned his head in the direction of the light and saw that it was coming from an orb building up in front of Sung Sun's right hand. She then raised her hand toward forearms and fired the pink light as a zero. The beam struck the ground beside forearms, but the force of the explosion was more than enough to make the hero airborne again. I'm starting to see a pattern here, forearms muttered in annoyance. It was then that Apache appeared and clotheslined the back of his head. The Arankar pushed her arm, sending forearms back toward the ground. The wielder of the Ultimatrix thrust all four of his hands out as he was about to make contact with the ground. The sand blasted around as he made impact, but he was relatively fine. Regardless, the three Fraxian were filled with satisfaction at their newfound progress. All right, Apache pumped her fist. As long as we keep our distance, we can win this. Forearms narrowed his eyes at the declaration, but he had to admit they had an advantage in terms of range. Then he got an idea that made him grin. It was time to have some fun with these three. He tapped the Ultimatrix symbol and was bathed in green light once again. After the light faded, a new alien was revealed. A small creature with swamp green skin, green eyes, a tan stomach, blackish green spots all over his back, sides, and tail, sharp teeth, and black claws. Everyone was put off by this strange and altogether unimposing new alien. Who is this supposed to be? Lilinet asked with a raised brow. The small alien smiled at her. Say hello to Upchuck. Upchuck? A visibly unimpressed Apache repeated. What's he gonna do? Throw up on us? Upchuck grinned at her. Something like that. Sung Sung frowned at the hero's words. While she too was skeptical, she also knew he wouldn't have turned into this new form without a good reason. She just needed to know why. Apache decided to take the offensive. Red energy gathered around her horn before she fired it as a zero. She aimed it off to the side, but then Upchuck surprised them all by jumping right in front of the blast. What are you doing? Apache cried. Ben, Lilinet shouted. Are you crazy? Get out of there. But Upchuck stood his ground. Everyone was convinced he was done for, before he did something they definitely didn't see coming. He opened his mouth, which seemed to expand wider than his body, and the zero disappeared inside. Upchuck's body expanding in response. This action left the Arankar utterly stunned. Upchuck had eaten a zero, and the surprise didn't end there when Upchuck opened his mouth and fired Apache's zero right back at her. She and her teammates scrambled to avoid the incoming attack. Upchuck put his hands on his hips. How was that? Interesting, Harable said. So it seems Chromastone isn't your only alien who can absorb and redirect energy. I heard my predecessor had a similar technique where she could eat a zero and then fire it back at her opponent while combining it with her own. Huh? Upchuck turned toward her. Predecessor? You mean someone else was the third Espada before you? Yes, Harable answered him. Out of all the Espada, only Aranero remains of the original group. That surprised Upchuck. How many Arankar had Aizen gone through before his current Espada? His musings were interrupted when something struck the side of his head and sent him flying across the sands yet again. The tiny eating machine bounced along the ground before skidding to a stop. Upchuck moaned as he picked himself up. Did anyone get the number of that truck? He mumbled. Did you forget about us? Miller Rose asked, lowering her leg after she had kicked Upchuck. She and her teammates surrounded their small opponent. So this guy can eat energy attacks, huh? Apache commented. Let's see how well he does against physical attacks, Sung Sun suggested. Prepare yourself, Miller Rose shouted. With that, the three charged at him again. Surprisingly, Upchuck stood his ground, shifting his stance as the three got closer. Off to the side, Harable narrowed her eyes. wondering what the shape-shifting hero was up to. Did he really expect to fight them as he was? Was this Upchuck form more capable of combat than his appearance led one to believe? Just as the three were about to attack again, Upchuck opened his mouth, unleashing 4 long tongues, which then wrapped around his opponents. They had little time for register this development before. With deceptive strength, the tongues pulled them toward Upchuck. They only had enough to realize what the alien was up to before all 3 disappeared into his mouth, Upchuck's cheeks swelling to massive proportions. Harem and Lilinet stared at the spectacle, uncertain if what they saw really happened. After a moment, when she saw that yes, it had happened, Lilinet burst into a fit of laughter, falling over and kicking her legs wildly. Upchuck gave a smile of contentment. That really hit the spot. It was hard to tell if he was joking or not. Suddenly Upchuck's cheeks began wiggling wildly. The gourmand lurched to the right, to the left, backwards, and forwards. Lilinet stopped laughing when she saw Upchuck's strange behavior. "Are you okay?" Upchuckle tried to speak when a pair of hands popped out of his lips and started to slowly pry his mouth open. Apache's head popped out and she looked absolutely livid. "Let us out," she howled. Upchuck shrugged before heaving and then spewing out Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun. Despite being covered in green saliva, the 3 were completely unscathed. The sight was more than enough to reduce Lilinet back to hysterics. "That," Sung Sun muttered, "was disgusting." Apache rounded on Upchuck, the look on her face screaming bloody murder. "I'm gonna make you pay," she made to attack but froze when Upchuck opened his mouth a crack. She was in no hurry to go back in there. "That was great," Lilinet chortled. "Upchuck can sure pack in a lot. Where does he put it all?" Upchuck scratched his chin. "I don't really know. Never really thought about it." Just then Upchuck's stomach let out a gurgling sound. The gourmand looked at his belly, blushing. "Guess I'm getting a little hungry." In fact, when was the last time he had eaten? Before he got sent to Hucomundo. He had been so caught up in everything that he hadn't noticed. So his body finally decided to remind him. "You're lucky you don't taste very good." Lilinet couldn't resist ribbing Harible's Fraxian. Needless to say, they were not amused. "Then that will end our training for now," Harible said, uncrossing her arms. "We will head back and get some food." She walked over to her Fraxiani, who flinched when they realized she was coming over. They were so ashamed of the humiliating defeat they had been dealt. How could they have left one human make complete fools out of them? "You 3 fought well," Harible told them encouragingly, causing them to look up at her in surprise. "Use this experience to help you improve yourselves." They lowered their heads respectfully to their leader. "Yes, Lady Harible," they said at the same time. Harible looked over at Upchuck. "You also fought well." Upchuck smiled, rubbing the back of his head. He then tapped the Ultimatrix symbol and turned back into Ben. The moment he changed back, his stomach let out another growl, making him blush. "So," Ben said once they had returned to Las Notches, "what do you guys eat around here?" He fought the urge to add aside from the whole soul thing. "Lord Aizen has been building Las Notches from under the Soul Reaper's noses for some time now," Harible replied. "He also made sure to bring in supplies such as food that could make this place inhabitable once he left Soul Society. If you're wondering, yes, Aruncar are capable of eating human food." Despite the unlikeliness of the possibility, Ben couldn't help but ask, "Do you guys have chili fries or smoothies?" That got him a look of confusion from the rest of the company, confirming his suspicions. "What are those?" Lilinet asked curiously. "They are among the greatest inventions that humankind has ever created, Lilinet," Ben said, throwing an arm around the young Aruncar's shoulder. "Maybe if we find some way to have you guys visit my universe, I can treat you to some." The Aruncar could see he was exaggerating, but they wondered how good these items were for Ben to sing their praises. "I'm afraid we don't have any of those," Harible informed him apologetically. Ben shrugged. "It's okay. I had a feeling you probably didn't, but I wanted to be sure. So where do we go to eat anyway?" "We usually have servants bring the food to our chambers," Harible told him. "Apache, you and the others go back to the room. I'll join you shortly." Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun were startled by this order. They weren't keen on having Ben Tennyson in their quarters, but Lady Harible wanted them to try and get along. Yes, Lady Harable, Mila Rose complied. She eyed the others. Come on. Ben and Lillianette shared a surprised glance. They honestly hadn't expected to be allowed in another Espada's chambers. But they decided they might as well since Harable offered, and thus followed after her Fraxian. Ben was amazed once he entered Harable's palace. They had a balcony with a great view over the courtyard, which probably explained how Apache and the others had been able to find him so easily. Not seeing any chairs, Ben sat down on the floor, Lillianette sitting beside him. Apache leaned against the wall, Mila Rose rested her arms on the balcony, and Sung Sun simply stood there, staring off into space. An awkward silence filled the room, nobody daring to make the first move. Finally, Ben decided to take a chance. So, what do you three and Harable do to pass the time? The three were put off by the sudden question. Pass the time? Sung Sung asked. Yeah, like, what do you three do for fun? Apache scoffed. Fun? We're about to go to war against Soul Society. We don't have time to do things like fun. Come on, Apache, Lillianette said defensively. Lighten up. Then she gave the other girls a devious look. Or are you still upset that Ben made you look stupid? Apache growled in annoyance. Mila Rose and Sung Sun shot Lillianette their own dirty looks, but theirs were far more subdued, admitting that she had a point. To be fair, they got some good hits in, Ben said in their defense, rubbing where he had gotten hit. And then you ate them, Lillianette reminded him. Apache's clenched fist shook and her face was slowly reddening, looking ready to explode. Ben was about to try and intervene when the door opened. Harable entered, followed by a male Arankar pushing a serving cart containing several domed platters, cups, and a pitcher. Apache's anger immediately evaporated once her leader came in. If Harable was aware of what almost happened before she arrived, she showed no sign of knowing. The other Arankar, no doubt a servant, began pouring water from the pitcher into the various cups. Once he was done, he removed the domes from the plates, revealing various fruits, vegetables, and bread. I wasn't sure what you would like to eat from what we have available, Harable explained to Ben. It's okay, Ben said appreciatively. Food's food and I'm not going to be picky. Besides, after a summer of my grandpa's cooking, I could probably eat anything. Well, almost anything. That earned a chuckle from not only Lillianette, but also Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun, who quickly realized what they were doing and cut their laughter short with minor blushes. But it hadn't gone unnoticed by Ben, and he smiled. Harable noticed this too, and she was glad to know that, in a small way, progress was being made. You can leave the tray here, Harable informed the servant once he was done setting up everything. Yes, Lady Harable, the servant bowed before leaving. Help yourselves, Harable then told the others. Ben and the girls got up and started filling their plates. Once everyone had food and a drink, they sat back down. Unless Lord Aizen has need of you, we will train later, Harable said after everyone was settled in and started eating. Ben noticed that she didn't take a plate or cup and wondered why. Just then Ben let out an involuntary yawn. Sounds like you're getting sleepy, Ben, Lillianette said. Now that she mentioned it, Ben was starting to feel pretty worn out. What time was it? Did Los Notches even have a set time? It seemed like it was always night out there. How long had it been since he got here? Perhaps you should go rest once you're finished, Harable said. Sounds good, Ben agreed before letting out another yawn. He drank some of his water to help him stay awake. Well, Ben, Lillianette said, since there's nothing else to do, why not tell us about some more of your adventures? Ben chuckled. Why didn't I see that coming? But he decided that he might as well to pass the time and tried to think of what story to tell them. How about I tell the time I first put the OMNITRIX back on when I was 15? Since the girls still barely knew about his adventures, they didn't see any reason not to hear this story. Sure, Lillianette answered. Well, after I finally managed to get the OMNITRIX off when I was 11, life was pretty peaceful, Ben began. No evil alien warlords trying to conquer the galaxy, no criminals that the police couldn't handle on their own. I was just a normal kid, and it actually felt pretty nice. You didn't miss turning into aliens and being a hero? Apache asked despite herself. I won't deny that there were times I missed being a hero, Ben admitted. But I guess the fact that I could actually have fun without some bad guy ruining my day was too good for me to just give up. Well, one day, after I helped my soccer team win the big game, I went to go show my grandpa my medal. But when I got to the rust bucket, he wasn't there. Instead, there was a Dean alien. I managed to scare him away and found a message from my grandpa. It sounded like he was in trouble and I might need to put the OMNITRIX on again. But I was so used to having a normal life that wearing it again felt strange to me. I went to go find Gwen and see what she thought I should do. She said it was my choice. We then ran into a friend of our grandpa's, a high-ranking plumber named Magister Labrid. He was helping my grandpa investigate possible alien activity before grandpa went missing. After teaming up, we went to a train yard where a deal was going down. Kevin, who I hadn't seen since we were kids, was brokering a deal between the Dean aliens and the Forever Knights. For some reason, the Dean aliens were supplying the Forever Knights with these weapons called laser lances. I never really understood why, but I'm guessing they were trying to use the weapons dealing thing to hide what they were really doing on Earth. Or they needed the money to buy better resources for their own plans. Anyway, Magister Labrid decided to arrest them, and we got into a fight. I put the OMNITRIX on and it recalibrated, giving me a whole new set of aliens. I turned into Swampfire, and as I was kicking butt, Ben smiled fondly. I started to remember how great it felt to go hero. The Forever Knights and Dean aliens managed to get away, but we captured Kevin. After getting him to work with us, we tracked down the Forever Knights at one of their castles. We destroyed the alien tech Kevin had given them, but Magister Labrid was fatally wounded during the battle. Ben became downcast. He died, but we were determined to finish his case. We owed him that much. Harable felt a wave of sympathy for Ben. To constantly be exposed to such things at such a young age and still be willing to press on. He had a strong spirit and an incredible will. We were able to track the Dean aliens down to a mine where they had hidden the spaceship, Ben continued. Gwen was able to sense that Grandpa had been there, but not recently. Sense? Mila Rose noticed. How did she sense it? Oh, Gwen's part alien, Ben said casually. Our grandmother turned out to be an energy alien called an anodite who can manipulate mana, kind of like our universe's version of spirit energy, and Gwen inherited the same powers. This caught everyone in the room by surprise. Wait, doesn't that make you part anodite too? Sung Sun asked, noticing how Ben specifically said his cousin was part alien. Ben made a face of uncertainty. I'm not really sure. According to Grandma, only descendants who inherit the spark have anodite heritage and powers, and I apparently don't. So since you don't have this spark, you are a regular human? Harable inquired. Yep, Ben said with a nod, and then he paused. At least I think so. To be fair, I never really tried to find out. Apache slumped. Do you ever bother to learn anything, or do you just constantly wing it? Ben grinned at her. Hey, it's worked for me so far. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. Apache groaned, rubbing her head in annoyance at how laid back he was about this. We're getting off track, Lilynette said abruptly. Let's get on with the story. Ben shrugged. Fair enough. Well, I decided to complete Grandpa Max's and Magister Labrid's mission. We got onto the Dean alien's ship, fought them off, and destroyed their laser lances before we ran into their leader, a hybrid. That guy was tough, possibly as strong as Vilgax. I held him off while Gwen and Kevin escaped. The guy wasn't pleased that we lower life forms were ruining his plans, going on about how he needed to relocate his ship and sterilize the whole area. Sterilize? Sung Sun asked. Ben's eyes narrowed. Kill all living beings within a 5-mile radius, Ben said coldly. Geez, Lilynette breathed. I know you said these guys hated other life forms, but doing that just so that they could move their base. Yeah, Ben said darkly. He threw me off the ship after he got it out of the mine, but Gwen managed to save me. The hybrid was about to destroy the town, activating some laser that was destroying everything in its path. I managed to get onto the ship's engines and destroy them. The ship went out of control and crashed into a mountain. As you can see, I managed to get off in time. Must have been close, Lilynette said. You have no idea, Ben agreed. Seems I'm always escaping an exploding ship in at least one adventure. At least you defeated the hybrid, Harable said, though Ben's story made her curious. It sounded like the hybrid and his minions didn't survive the crash. Ben was willing to kill his enemies if it meant saving others, so why, when he first met Lord Aizen, had he asserted that he wouldn't kill anyone in cold blood? Obviously something happened, but she couldn't figure out what. There was a lot more to this boy than they realized. But she decided to put that away for now. Perhaps when they were able to fully trust each other, she would try and find out. Once they were all fed and watered, they stacked their plates and drinks on the cart. Ben let out another yawn. Time for us to head back, Lillianette. Sounds good to me, said Arrancar replied as she stretched. I'll escort you back as I return the dishes, HAREM offered. I don't want to risk Grimjow or OMNITRIX trying to go behind Lord Aizen's back again. She looked over at her Fraxian. Wait here. The three nodded respectfully. Understood, Lady HAREM. HAREM took the cart and pushed it out the door, Ben and Lillianette following after her. Soon they reached Stark's chambers. Thank you for the food, HAREM, Ben said politely. Thanks, Lillianette said, not wanting to appear ungrateful. HAREM nodded to them. Again, you did well against my Fraxiani, Tennyson. But be prepared, I might allow them to not hold back as much next time. Sounds good, Ben said confidently. I'd like to see what they can really do. I'll keep that in mind, HAREM said. Take care until then. And she left. Lillianette said once HAREM was out of earshot. I still think you can take them. I mean, they're small fries compared to an espada. Why would they give you any trouble? Don't be sure, Lillianette, Ben said. You'd be surprised by how some of my enemies got the upper hand because I didn't take them seriously. Lillianette huffed, still certain Ben could handle HAREM's Fraxiani, but at the same time, knowing that he wasn't exactly wrong. When they got back inside, they noticed extra pillows and a bed against the wall. Next to it was a stack of papers resting on top of a desk. Stark slowly stirred. Oh, you're back, he said nonchalantly. Lowly and Menely came by earlier. The bed and other stuff are for Ben. Lord Aizen left a note for him with those papers. Curious, Ben went over to the desk and picked up the paper on top of the stack. However, when he looked at the paper, he discovered it was written in Japanese. What's wrong? Lillianette asked, noticing his look of frustration. Ben looked at her sheepishly. I can't read this. Why not? Lillianette asked. I only know how to read English, Ben admitted. Static and Lillianette's eyes widened. But how do you understand what we're saying? The latter asked. We're speaking in Japanese. You are? Ben asked in amazement. He was first confused, but then comprehension dawned on him. The Ultimatrix has a built-in translator. I guess it was active before I got here or something. Or maybe Azimuth had activated it when he was upgrading the Ultimatrix. That would explain it, Stark said. Huh. Pretty sure if Lord Aizen had known, he would have written it in English for you. Lillianette snatched the paper out of Ben's hands and began reading it. Oh, Lord Aizen says he's made you a map of Lost Notches to help you find your way around better, and he's left notes about the 13 court guard squads. He believes it'll be easier than always pulling you from one place to another. That's certainly handy, Ben said as he looked over the papers. He frowned when he realized they were all in Japanese. Lillianette noticed his look of frustration. I'll read it for you, she volunteered. Ben smiled appreciatively. Thanks, Lillianette. No problem, the Arrancar said with a wave of her hand. She took the papers and began reading. Okay, now it says here that there are 20 numbered ranks within the 13 squads. The lower the number, the higher the rank. Lord Aizen believes that you'll probably just need to worry about the captains, who are the most powerful officers, and the lieutenants, who are the second most powerful. They're kind of like Fraxiani to the captains. Ben nodded as he absorbed this information. The captain of Squad 1 is Captain Commander Genrusai Shichikuni Yamamoto, Lillianette read on. He's also the one currently in charge of the Soul Society itself and can command the rest of the 13 squads. Lord Aizen says he's really powerful and his Zanpakuto Ryujinjaka is regarded as the deadliest Zanpakuto in all the squads. It lets him create and control powerful flames, fitting its release command, here Lillianette gulped, reduce all creation to ash. Ben found himself shivering. That sounds pleasant, he said with obvious sarcasm. Lord Aizen stresses to be really careful if you were to face him. Even recommends that unless you have an alien that actually could fight him, then stay away from him. Ben cupped his chin. A fire Zanpakuto, huh? Water hazard or big chill might work. Then there was always heat blast or NRG. Possibly ultimate big chill. The captain of Squad 2 goes by the name of Sui Feng, Lilinet read on. She's also the commander-in-chief of something called the Stealth Forces. Looks like it's some sort of covert ops assassin group. It says her flash step is the greatest out of all the captains, and she's really good at hand-to-hand combat. Her Zanpakuto, Suzumabachi, has the ability to kill people with poison. According to this, whenever she stabs someone with her blade, it leaves a butterfly mark. If she hits the mark twice, the victim will die. Ben blanched. A sword that could kill someone in 2 moves. While the obvious counter would be not to get hit in the same spot, or hit at all. That was easier said than done if she was the fastest of Soul Society's captains. Aliens with ranged attacks or intangibility sounded best against her. Squad 3 was Jin's division, so it looks like you don't need to worry about a captain from there. Lilinet switched to another note. Captain of Squad 4, the healing division, is Ritsu Anohana. Lord Aizen says that Anohana will probably focus more on tending to the wounded in battle, and you'd probably want to avoid fighting her. Squad 5 was Lord Aizen's division, Lilinet skimmed over. The captain of Squad 6 is Byakuya Kuchiki. Kinda paraphrasing here, but it sounds like Lord Aizen's saying this Byakuya guy's really stuck up and looks down on people he thinks are beneath him. Ben frowned, already not liking whoever this guy was. His Zanpakuto is called Senbenzakura, Lilinet whistled as she read the description. It has the power to scatter into 1,000 blade fragments that Byakuya can control remotely with his hilt. He's also almost as fast as Sui Feng, a great tactician, and really good at Kaido. Lord Aizen really wants you to be careful around him. Ben figured that a lot of his more durable aliens like Diamond Head or NRG were better suited against this guy. Of course, any of his aliens with intangibility would be useful just like they would against Sui Feng. Lodestar might work. The captain of Squad 7 is Seijin Kamamura, Lilinet told him. Aside from being one of the physically strongest captains, his Zanpakuto, Tenken, allows him to summon gigantic armored body parts that mimic whatever move he does. Giant body parts that copied the captain's movements. Ben considered that. If the parts copied the captain's movements, it sounded like he needed to go for the captain himself. But he had a feeling the giant parts weren't going to make that easy. The captain of Squad 8 is Shunsui Kaioraku. Like Static, he's really laid back. Lilinet shot a look at Stark. More like really lazy. Stark waved his hand half-heartedly, as if confirming what Lilinet said. His counterpart rolled her eye before looking back at the note. But he's actually a really good strategist and combatant. Kaiten Kaiokatsu is the name of his Zanpakuto and is one of the few dual Zanpakutos. Dual? Ben repeated. He's got 2. Do they have separate powers or do they share the same ones? Looks like they share the same power, Lilinet said. She narrowed her eye, as if checking to see if what she was reading was accurate. What's wrong? Ben asked. Lilinet started. I don't understand this. But it says that Kaiten Kaiokatsu's special power is to create games that both Kaioraku and his opponent have to follow. Ben made a face. Games? Yeah, games, Lilinet said. Lord Aizen says that he himself doesn't know the full extent of these games, how many the Zanpakuto can make, if it even has a limit, but he thinks your wide variety of aliens should be able to counter what games you actually have to play against him. That makes me feel so much better, Ben muttered, feeling the exact opposite. Squad 9 was Tozen's division, while Squad 10 is led by Toshiro Hitsugeya. Like how that Yamamoto guy can control fire with Ryujin Jaka, Toshiro's Zanpakuto, Hiranmaru, can control ice. Ice, huh? Swamp fire, heat blast, or NRG for sure. Squad 11 is led by Kenpachi Zaraki. Like Grim Jiao and Ennoitra, he loves fighting and is always seeking out good opponents. Lord Aizen thinks he'll definitely go after you. Oh great, another one, Ben groaned, resting his head in his arm. Lilinet chuckled before continuing. Zaraki's Zanpakuto is different from the others. Even though it's always in its release state, it's only because Zaraki has no control over his spiritual power. He doesn't actually know his sword's name or what it can do, but he's so strong that it hardly matters. Ben stared. A guy who couldn't use his sword's powers but was still a captain because he was just that strong. Zaraki also wears an eye patch that suppresses his spiritual power. Squad 12's captain is Mayuri Kuretsuchi, a scientist who will probably try to experiment on you if he has the chance. Ben let out a bigger groan. First a Soul Reaper and Neutra Grimjow, and now a Soul Reaper Shale. This couldn't get any worse. As a scientist, Kuretsuchi specializes in studying his enemies and then creating proper countermeasures. He also experiments on himself and can give his body a variety of different modifications. His Zanpakuto, Ashishogi Jizo, has the ability to paralyze anyone who is slashed by it by affecting nerve impulses, although the paralyzed are still able to feel things like pain. Lord Aizen recommends taking down Kuretsuchi quickly before he has time to counter your aliens. He also recommends keeping some of your aliens in reserve so that you can take Kuretsuchi by surprise. Considering that Ben was already doing that with his allies, he felt he was decently prepared if he ever went up against this captain. Mostly anyway. The captain of Squad 13 is Jushiro Yukitake. He's a well-meaning man but willing to fight if necessary. His Zanpakuto, Sagio no Katawari, another dual type, is similar to Chromastone in that they can absorb energy attacks and redirect them back at enemies. Ben fell onto the bed as he processed all that information. These guys had some really dangerous powers, plus the notes said they were good at other things like Kaido. And if his training with Tozen, Jin, and the Arankar was anything to go by, his upcoming fights were not going to be like anything he had ever faced before. Ben felt his eyelids grow heavy, sleepiness starting to fog up his mind. Lillinet noticed this and smiled sympathetically. "Guess you finally wore yourself out." "Yeah," Ben said weakly. "I've had a long day." He yawned. "At least, I think it's been a day." Lillinet nodded. "Get some sleep, then. I'll see you whenever you wake up." "Night, Lillinet," Ben mumbled as he turned over and drifted off to sleep. "Night, Ben," Lillinet said back. "How come you tell him good night, but you hit me when I try to sleep?" Stark asked. Lillinet proceeded to kick him in response. Aizen sat in the throne room, waiting for Ulquiorra and Yami to return from the mission he had sent them on. Despite the very valuable addition to his forces, there was someone else he had been focusing on, a certain substitute Soul Reaper, and he had sent the two Espada to see how well he was progressing with his power. While he waited, Aizen's mind drifted back to his newfound ally. Stek had informed him that the boy was sleeping and Aizen decided to let him rest. Once he woke up, Aizen would work out a schedule to better manage his training. He also needed to check with Shale to see if he could create something that Ben could use to protect himself if he was unable to use the Ultimatrix. While still thinking of Ben, Aizen wondered if he would be able to make good use of the notes he made regarding the 13 squads. He knew they were a bit lacking, especially since he hadn't even covered the Bankai for the various captains or the talents of their lieutenants, but he wanted to see how well Ben could do with only a little information and his own ingenuity. Shale, Kuretsuchi, and Kisukirihara weren't the only ones who liked to experiment. Aizen became aware of Ulquiorra and Yami entering the throne room. He noticed that Yami was missing his left arm. It seemed something interesting had happened in the world of the living. "I have made my return, Lord Aizen," Ulquiorra stated. "Welcome back, Ulquiorra," Aizen greeted his Espada. "Yami, you may now begin your report." "Yes, Lord Aizen," Ulquiorra said as he reached towards his eye. "For something unexpected occurred during our mission." Aizen's interest was caught. Unexpected? Meanwhile, observing all of this was none other than the man who had sent Ben to Hugo Mundo in the first place. Nobody knew his real name save for those he allowed, but most people he encountered knew him by the name of Thorn. Well, Thorn said as he watched events play out. "Paradox, you rascal. I never thought you'd have it in you. Uo, Aizen and Soul Society both better get ready. This thing's been taken to a whole new level." So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 6. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Bigby the Big Bad Wolf FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.